y'all. Once again, glad that we're able to share community with one another using technology. I can't wait until this is all over and we're able to be together physically in the same location here at the church. Looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun when we get to be together again. But until then, we're incredibly thankful for the ability to use technology and the internet to connect with one another. Last week, we talked about Jacob and Esau, and Esau selling his birthright to Jacob. And now we're going to focus a little bit more on Jacob, because that's kind of where Genesis goes. It follows Jacob much more so than Esau. And when we look at Jacob and his life is one of struggle with other people. He struggles with people his entire life. You look at when he's born, the Bible tells us that he was struggling with his brother even before he was born, actually, inside his mother's womb. He and his brother were struggling. They were fighting. They were at odds. That continues into adulthood. We saw that last week with Jacob basically tricking Esau into selling his birthright to him. That continues, and Jacob steals his father's blessing, which was a big deal in this culture as well. And that makes Esau so mad. Esau wants to kill him. He says, you know what? Dad's old. When Dad dies and the time for mourning, basically like once Dad's funeral's over, I'm going to kill my brother for everything he's done to me. That's the relationship Jacob had with Esau. And so Jacob basically runs away. He runs away to his uncle's place. It's miles and miles and miles away where Esau's not going to chase him. And while he's there, he marries his wives, plural, 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. And he begins to work for their father, his uncle Laban. And just like he struggled with his brother, he struggles with his uncle Laban. Laban continually tries to basically cheat Jacob. And it never works out because God is with Jacob. God protects Jacob from being cheated, and it makes Laban mad because Laban's basically losing money every time he tries to cheat Jacob. He's losing more and more money. And it makes Laban angry, makes him really, really mad. And eventually, Jacob decides, you know what, it's time for me to go back home. It's time for me to go back to my family, to leave my uncle and to go back to my family. And so he takes his wives, all of his property, all his sheep, all his goats, everything he owns, and he starts to go back. And Laban chases him until they eventually come to an agreement that basically they're going to leave each other alone, not mess with each other. And Jacob goes home, and he sends his servants out in front of him to check things out. And they come back and go, hey, your brother Esau has 400 guys with him. He's waiting for you. And so Jacob's getting really, really scared now because he's going, hey, the last time I saw my brother, he was saying he was going to kill me. And now he's got 400 guys with him. This might be it. So he's really, really afraid. And this eventually leads to him actually struggling with God himself. And that's where we're at today. We're in Genesis 32, and we're starting in verse 22. And that says, the same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Okay, so you have this scene where Jacob sends all of his family across this river, and he's entirely alone. And this guy comes up and he starts to wrestle him. So they're kind of locked, pushing each other back and forth, wrestling, fighting. The way I see this in my mind is kind of like whenever I'm wrestling with my little nephews. They're pushing with all their might, and I'm just kind of standing there playing around with them, not really trying too hard. And then eventually, whenever I get tired of them, I pick them up, slam them, pin them, over. That's kind of the way I look at it as far as God here wrestling with Jacob. I feel like God's kind of like the older brother or the uncle that is wrestling and not taking it too seriously. And then when he decides he's done, he's done. He just taps Jacob on the hip. That hip dislocates. Match is over. Because you're not going to be able to wrestle very well with a dislocated hip. But we see this is kind of the climax in Jacob's life, where he's just been building struggle upon struggle upon struggle upon struggle until he gets to the point where he's struggling with God. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of Jacob's it moment. It's his conversion experience, if you want to word it that way. This is kind of the moment where, for him, God goes from being the God of his father and his grandfather to being his God, being the God that he worships, the God that he serves. You see this where he's clinging to God. He's afraid. He's got nothing to reassure him except God himself. He's worried, my brother's going to kill me. I don't know what's going to happen. My uncle just ran me out of town, basically. Everyone's kind of against me. And so he's clinging to God, going, "God, I'm not letting you go until you bless me, until you tell me that everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to let go." And God does that, and he lets go. And that kind of becomes his it moment, his moment where his faith becomes his own. It's no longer his mom's, it's no longer his dad's, it's no longer his granddad's, it's his faith. And there's a lesson in that for us. Our faith has to be our own. We can be raised in a Christian household, we can be taught all the right things, but until that relationship is there between you and God, not between your mom and God, not between your dad and God, not between your aunt or uncle or whoever else might have taken you to church your whole life and God. It's got to be between you and God. That's when it becomes real to you. Just like it became real to Jacob here. And we see this as well, that he spent his life trying to get blessings from everybody. He tried to get his brother's birthright and succeeded. He stole his brother's blessing from his father by deceiving his dad. His dad was blind by this point, and he tricked his dad into thinking he was his brother, and he stole his brother's blessing. So he'd been looking for these blessings, these approvals from everybody except for God until this moment. And this is when he realized, you know what? It's God's opinion that matters. I care what my dad thinks about me. I care what other people think about me. But God's opinion of me, what God thinks of me, is what matters. And this is where he realizes that. And once again, that's what I want us to see too. Ultimately, God's opinion of us is what matters. The people at school, the people we come into contact with around town, we want their respect. But ultimately, we want God's approval over man's approval. And so that's something we're seeing here when Jacob wrestles with God. He's going, Lord, give me your blessing. Let me know it's going to be okay. I'm terrified. I'm scared out of my mind. I don't know what's going to happen. I need your blessing. I need you to reassure me that it's going to be okay. And God does that. And now, I'm not saying that if we pray hard enough or try hard enough that we will be given everything we ever ask for. That's something that is a false gospel. There are preachers that preach that if you pray hard enough, then you're going to get all the money, all the cars, all the big houses that you could ever want. And that doesn't line up with what the Bible teaches. Even for Christians, there are going to be times where things are difficult, where life doesn't seem like it's going right. And it's during those moments that we want to cling to God, just like Jacob is clinging to God here. And we want to trust that God has a plan. And ultimately, all Christians are blessed by God with salvation through Christ. That's the greatest blessing anybody could ever be given from God, is salvation. And if you're a believer in Christ, then you have that. And so you have been blessed beyond measure by God already. And so those are kind of our takeaways, that we want our faith to be our own. It's got to be yours. It can't be your mom's or your dad's or your aunt's or your uncle's, grandparents. It's got to be your faith. It needs to be personal. And we want to cling to God. Whenever we don't know what else to do, cling to God. When we're scared, cling to God. Trust the Lord in all things. That's what we want to do. That's what I want to encourage you to do. And just trust that the Lord has his plan. And just so that you're not left hanging, the way this wraps up, Jacob goes out and he meets his brother Esau. And, he's been worried this whole time, okay, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill my wives, he's going to kill my kids, he's going to kill everybody that I know and love. And he goes out and he meets his brother, and basically his brother gives him a big old hug and tells him, man, it's been too long, I forgive you, we're good. And so all these things that Jacob was worried about had already been resolved on the other end. Esau had already let it go. And Jacob was panicking because of his own mind. And so that's another encouragement as well. Just that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes these things that seem like they're going majorly wrong, It's more on our end than on the other end. And God may have already worked things out on the other side, and we just don't know it yet because we're too scared to go and find out. But that's what I've got for us this week. Just want to encourage y'all, stay safe, wash your hands a lot. I love y'all and hope to see y'all soon. Yeah.